Jonah grew up in America's foster care system, moving from one home to another throughout his childhood. He rarely stayed with any family longer than a year. Sometimes, it was only a matter of months before another big black garbage bag was tossed at his feet, signaling it was time to pack up and move on. He hated those bags. They felt like a reminder that his life could be stuffed away and carted off anytime. Being a black child in foster care presented its own set of challenges. Some foster parents didn't know how to care for his hair or appreciate his culture. Others shied away from him altogether. He recalled overhearing conversations that went, "We're not sure how we'd relate to a black boy," as if he were an alien species. Each rejection hammered home a painful message: he didn't quite fit. There were, however, bright spots. An older foster mother once taught him to cook chicken and dumplings. A caring caseworker, noticing Jonah's fondness for drawing, gifted him a sketch pad. A teacher praised him for his vivid short stories, encouraging him to keep writing. These small kindnesses provided Jonah glimpses of hope, enough to keep him believing that, one day, he would find a sense of belonging. And more than anything else, Jonah dreamed of creating a home he could call his own, a home so stable no one could snatch it away. Each time he packed his bag, he vowed that when he grew up, he'd adopt children who felt unwanted, offering them the permanence he craved. When Jonah aged out of foster care at 18, he left with little money and no family to rely on. He rented a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, working 2 part-time jobs while attending community college. Scrubbing dishes at a diner in the morning and stocking shelves at a grocery store at night, he pushed through exhaustion because he had a goal: he wanted enough stability, financial and emotional, to adopt a child. Those early years were a blur of sleepless nights and relentless determination. After earning his associate degree in social services, Jonah landed a job at a local nonprofit that worked with Child Protective Services, CPS. Suddenly, he was on the other side of the system, supporting families and children in crisis. While it was draining at times, he thrived on the sense that his experiences truly mattered. Kids in group homes looked at him, a former foster youth, and saw someone who understood their fears and hopes firsthand. Every paycheck, Jonah tucked a bit of money away into savings. By his late 20s, he'd scraped enough together for a small down payment on a modest, single-story house. With neutral-tone siding and a tidy front lawn, it wasn't luxurious, but it was home, his home. After years of being uprooted, simply owning a front door he could lock and a living room where he could kick back felt like a miracle. When he was 30, Jonah decided it was time to act on his dream of adopting. Through his nonprofit connections, he learned about Scarlett, 6 years old, and Henry, 4, 2 white siblings who'd been shuttled between foster placements. The boy was anxious around new adults, clutching a battered teddy bear wherever he went. The girl, older and more guarded, spoke softly and kept to herself. During the initial adoption discussions, some eyebrows rose at the idea of a single black man fostering 2 white children, but Jonah didn't let it deter him. To him, love had never been a matter of matching skin color. He was used to being misunderstood and was determined to prove everyone wrong. After background checks, home visits, and interviews with social workers, the siblings finally moved in. Jonah painted their bedroom walls pale yellow, put up posters of cartoon animals, and lined shelves with age-appropriate books and stuffed toys. He wanted them to feel welcome the moment they walked through the front door. At first, Scarlett and Henry were quiet, unsure of whether this new living arrangement was temporary like all the others. Jonah took them on simple outings, an afternoon at a local park, a quick trip to the library where he let them pick out any books that caught their eyes. Each day, he made sure to say goodnight with a warm hug. He cooked waffles on Sunday mornings, introduced them to silly American idioms like, "Cat got your tongue," and told them how excited he was to be their dad. Slowly, he saw their walls begin to crumble. Scarlett started asking him questions about his childhood, curiosity replacing caution. Henry would leap onto his lap, searching for comfort after a nightmare. One evening, after Henry had a particularly tough meltdown, Scarlett whispered to Jonah, "Are we staying here for good?" Jonah bent down, meeting her wide eyes. "Yes," he promised. "Nobody's sending you anywhere else. This is our home." That was the night Scarlett began to call him Dad instead of Jonah. His heart soared. He realized that, for the first time in his life, he wasn't just a guest in someone else's home, he was the anchor, the dad, the one who made the rules and offered security. It felt remarkable. On a crisp Saturday, several months after the adoption was finalized, Jonah decided to treat Scarlett and Henry to dinner at Lou's Diner, a classic American eatery with neon signs and red leather booths. He told them they could order burgers, fries, and maybe even milkshakes for dessert. Henry, newly turned 5, loved fries so much he could eat them every day. Scarlett was more reserved but perked up at the mention of milkshakes. The diner was bustling that evening with the clatter of dishes and the soft buzz of conversation. They settled into a booth near the windows, and Jonah helped Henry with the coloring section on the kids' menu while Scarlett read the list of milkshake flavors. The server soon brought their meals, placing a chicken sandwich with spicy mayo in front of Jonah and kids' cheeseburgers for both children. It all seemed perfect, until Henry accidentally touched Jonah's spicy sauce and then rubbed his eye. He yelped, tears streaming. Scarlett gasped. Immediately, Jonah ushered Henry outside, hoping the cool air would help while he dabbed Henry's eye with a napkin. He felt a few stares from other diners but assumed they'd understand that kids cry sometimes. Out in the parking lot, Henry wailed. Jonah murmured, "It's okay, buddy. Just let me wipe it off." The little boy's face was red, his breath hitching between sobs. Jonah rocked him gently, whispering reassurance. That's when a woman pulled up in a small sedan, lowering her window to ask if everything was all right. Jonah tried to smile, telling her that Henry was his son, that he'd just gotten hot sauce in his eye. But something in her expression shifted. "You're the boy's father?" she asked, her tone dubious. Jonah felt a flicker of discomfort. He managed a polite nod. The woman frowned, reached for her phone, and Jonah heard her say something about a black man with a crying white boy. The word kidnapping slipped from her lips. Then she drove off. Jonah's stomach dropped. He'd heard cautionary tales about parents of different races being accused in random public places, but he'd never believed it would happen to him. Hoping to head off any trouble, he decided he'd quickly get Henry back inside, show everyone that they were simply a family. But within minutes, a police cruiser whipped into the parking lot with lights flashing. 2 officers jumped out, scanning the scene with urgency. One barked, "Sir, step away from the child." Jonah, holding a sobbing Henry, tried to explain, "This is my son. He got spicy sauce in his eye." But the officers didn't look reassured. Over Henry's muffled cries, Jonah caught words like abduction, unidentified male, and detain until confirmed. "Let me show you my ID," Jonah offered, heart pounding. But his wallet was still on the table inside. The second officer ordered him to put Henry down. Henry clung to Jonah, terrified. The first officer reached for his holster. Jonah, feeling panic surge, pleaded, "He's my kid. Please, we can go inside and get my wallet." Just then, Scarlett burst out of the diner, calling, "Dad." Her eyes went wide as she saw the officers surrounding Jonah, hands near their weapons. "He's our dad," she cried. The commotion attracted onlookers, a swirl of faces, some curious, others suspicious. Some people began snapping photos with their phones, muttering about a potential kidnapping. Chaos escalated. The taller officer grabbed Jonah's arm, twisting it behind his back as if he were about to bolt. Jonah winced. Henry screamed, "Daddy! No!" Scarlett tried to get close, but a bystander held her back, apparently believing she might be in danger. Jonah locked eyes with her, desperation ripping through him. He'd promised these kids they'd be safe. Now he was pinned, treated like a criminal in front of them. One onlooker shouted, "That man doesn't look like their dad." Another voice chimed in, "Somebody call more cops." A couple of individuals in the gathering crowd looked uncertain, but no one stepped forward to help right away. Jonah felt humiliation burn in his chest. He kept repeating, "These are my children," but the officers were too amped up to listen. Within minutes, another cruiser arrived, lights spinning. A woman in the crowd rushed forward and slapped Jonah across the face, shrieking, "You monster." The sting of her palm registered more as shock than pain. Jonah couldn't even raise his arms to protect himself. He was trapped in the officer's hold, half bent over the hood of the cruiser. Henry's cries twisted his gut, Scarlett's tearful face seared itself into his memory. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out, Marissa, Jonah's next-door neighbor. She had just parked her car and spotted the unfolding drama. "Wait, that's Jonah," she yelled, pushing through the crowd. "He's their adoptive father. Please, stop." Another friend from the community center, Raphael, rushed over too. "He's a single dad," Raphael insisted, "not a kidnapper." They tried to catch the officer's attention, waving their arms. The taller officer hesitated, loosening his grip on Jonah. "You know him?" he asked Marissa. She nodded vehemently. "Yes. Those kids live with him. He adopted them." The officer seemed taken aback. By then, Scarlett had darted to Marissa's side, sobbing, "They won't believe us." Marissa hugged her protectively. One by one, neighbors and acquaintances who recognized Jonah began stepping forward. Someone showed a photo on their phone of Jonah with both children at a 4th of July cookout, the three of them beaming as fireworks lit up the sky. Another held up a short video from a local community gathering, featuring Jonah guiding Henry at a carnival game. The officer's body language shifted from aggression to confusion. The second officer finally released Jonah's arm. Jonah straightened up, chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. His wrists throbbed from the tight grip. Henry sprinted over, burying his face in Jonah's leg. The crowd's hostility began to fracture, replaced by murmurings of uncertainty. The woman who slapped Jonah looked mortified, her face flushed. Some bystanders slunk away, shaking their heads. After reviewing a few more pieces of proof, photos, the kids' statements, even references from local residents, the lead officer lowered his gaze. "Sir," he said quietly to Jonah, "it appears we made a mistake. We responded to a call about a possible abduction without enough context." Jonah rubbed his sore wrists, trying to steady his breathing, still in a fog of anger and humiliation. "My wallet is inside," he managed to say, voice trembling. "You could have asked the diner staff, or just listened when my kids said I'm their dad." The officer murmured another quick apology, looking deeply uncomfortable. He motioned for the crowd to disperse, though some lingered, snapping pictures or whispering. Henry wrapped both arms around Jonah's waist. Scarlett clung to Marissa until she saw it was safe to approach her father again. With shaky hands, Jonah placed an arm around each child. Marissa gently guided them back inside Lou's diner, where Jonah retrieved his wallet from the booth. The manager apologized profusely, offering free meals. But Jonah's appetite was gone, replaced by a hollow feeling in his gut. Scarlett and Henry looked wiped out, their eyes still brimming with confusion. Jonah forced a nod, thanking the staff for their concern, then led his children out into the parking lot again. This time, no lights or sirens flashed. The police had quietly driven off, leaving Jonah to deal with the emotional wreckage. Marissa insisted on following him home, worried that Jonah was too upset to drive alone. He gave her a soft smile, appreciative of her kindness. During the short ride, Henry asked, "Dad, are they going to take you away?" The anxiety in his voice cut Jonah to the core. "No," he whispered. "No one's taking me away. I promise." Scarlett sniffled, leaning against her window with arms crossed. She mumbled, "They hurt you." Jonah couldn't hide the quiver in his voice. "They did, but we're safe now. Let's get home." Back at their house, Jonah flipped on the porch light, ushering the kids inside. His cozy living room, once a sanctuary, now felt tinged with fear. Marissa came in briefly, making sure they were okay. Scarlett sat on the couch, looking numb. Henry wouldn't let go of Jonah's leg. Marissa offered to run to the store for anything they might need, but Jonah declined. He wanted to be alone with his children, to hold them tight and reassure them. She gave him a knowing nod before leaving, gently patting his shoulder. "You're a good dad," she said, voice thick with empathy. That night, Jonah barely slept. He rose before the sun, every muscle aching from tension. The kids had crawled into his bed around midnight, restless and frightened. He woke to Scarlett curled in a ball by his side and Henry splayed out like a starfish. For a moment, Jonah watched them breathe, heartbreak and gratitude colliding in his chest. He brushed a few strands of Scarlett's hair behind her ear and sighed, remembering the chaos of the evening before. By 7 a.m., he was in the kitchen brewing coffee. The kids shuffled in, still in pajamas. Henry climbed onto a chair, hugging his plush teddy. Scarlett lingered by the doorway, eyes flicking to Jonah. Neither said a word. Jonah inhaled, then offered a gentle smile. "Pancakes?" he asked softly. Henry nodded, though his expression was somber. While mixing batter, Jonah felt tears prick his eyes. This was supposed to be an ordinary family routine, pancakes on a weekend morning. Yet everything had changed. He didn't want to dwell on bitterness, but he couldn't shake the memory of being manhandled and slapped in front of his children. When he flipped the first pancake, he whispered under his breath, "No one will ever do that to us again if I can help it." He plated the pancakes, drizzling warm syrup, determined to salvage a piece of normalcy for the kids. They ate in near silence. Finally, Scarlett set down her fork. "Dad," she asked quietly, "why did they think you stole us?" Jonah swallowed hard, wishing he had a simple answer. "Some people see a family that looks different and jump to the wrong idea," he said, choosing his words carefully. "They got scared and acted on that fear. But that doesn't mean it was right." Henry fiddled with his teddy's ear. "I was so scared," he admitted. Jonah leaned over and pulled him into a hug. "I know, buddy. Me too. But we'll get through it together." Word of the incident spread through the neighborhood surprisingly fast. Marissa told a few people, who told a few more. By Monday, Jonah found small gestures of sympathy at his doorstep, a fruit basket, a handwritten card from a neighbor reading, "We're here for you. You're a wonderful dad." Others suggested he lodge a formal complaint against the police department or file assault charges against the woman who slapped him. Jonah was torn. Part of him wanted accountability for the humiliation, yet he also worried about reliving the ordeal. More than anything, he wanted to protect Scarlett and Henry from further trauma. At the local community center, a few folks set up a support network for transracial adoptive families. Invitations popped up for a meeting that weekend, titled "Standing Together Against Bias." Reluctant at first, Jonah eventually decided to take the kids. He thought they might feel less alone if they met other children with parents of different races. The day of the gathering, they walked into a stuffy but welcoming room lined with folding chairs. On the walls hung posters reading, "Family is love" and "Foster the future." Several families were present. A white dad bounced a curly-haired black toddler on his knee. A Latina mother scolded a rowdy teenager who appeared to be biracial. They all had stories of neighbors or strangers making assumptions. Some had faced downright harassment. Hearing these tales made Scarlett's eyes widen. Henry clung to Jonah's arm, shy but attentive. Jonah shared his own story, the woman calling 911, the crowd's brutal reaction, the slap, and the kid's tears. He described the sense of helplessness and anger, how it all unfolded in the blink of an eye. Heads around the room nodded in empathy. Afterward, several parents approached Scarlett and Henry with gentle smiles, saying things like, "You're so brave," and, "Remember, your family matters, no matter what anyone else thinks." The kids stood a bit taller, seeing they weren't alone. A couple of weeks after the incident, Jonah decided he had to go back to Lou's diner. The idea of returning to the scene of so much trauma made his stomach churn, but he was determined not to let fear define his life, or his kids' lives. He talked to Scarlett and Henry about it. At first, they were hesitant, especially Henry, who asked, "What if they think you're kidnapping us again?" Jonah knelt beside him. "We'll show them we're not afraid," he said, voice steady. "You two deserve milkshakes without worry." The day they went, the diner was quieter than before. No police cars out front, no suspicious stares. They slid into a booth near the jukebox. The server recognized them, offering an apologetic smile. "Welcome back," she said softly. "Anything on the house, you just let me know." Jonah nodded, thanking her. He could see the kids tense up at first, scanning the space for any sign of trouble. Gradually, they relaxed. Scarlett took out her crayons to draw on the back of a menu, and Henry fiddled with the salt shaker, giggling when Jonah made a silly joke about it being magic snow for French fries. When their orders arrived, Henry's eyes lit up at the sight of fries, though he carefully steered clear of Jonah's spicy sauce this time. Scarlett sipped her chocolate milkshake, casting glances around the diner to make sure no crowd was forming. It felt like a quiet triumph. They were reclaiming a place that once symbolized fear and turning it into a normal family outing. Back home, the family settled into a familiar rhythm. Scarlett progressed in second grade, proudly bringing home art projects featuring finger-painted turkeys and silly Thanksgiving poems. Henry started kindergarten, learning how to write his name neatly and make friends at recess. Jonah kept working with CPS, doing home visits, coordinating counseling sessions, and providing resources to struggling families. Yet, the memory of the diner incident never strayed far from his mind. In the neighborhood, some folks organized a small block party, partly to show solidarity with Jonah and his kids. They blocked off a portion of the street, set up fold-out tables covered in potluck dishes, barbecue ribs, macaroni salad, homemade cornbread. Kids played hopscotch, and a few older teens tossed a football around. Music blared from a portable speaker, upbeat country tunes mingling with old-school R&B classics. During the festivities, many people offered Jonah heartfelt gestures, a pat on the back, a concerned question about how the kids were coping. Marissa, who'd intervened so crucially, was hailed as a neighborhood hero. At one point, she and Jonah ended up behind a table slicing watermelon. She said quietly, "You're handling all this with so much grace." Jonah looked at the children, who were busy racing each other on scooters. "They keep me strong," he replied. "I can't break down when they need me more than ever." Despite the community's warmth, Scarlett still had nightmares sometimes. She'd dream about the police dragging Jonah away while she screamed, powerless to stop them. Henry would cling to Jonah's hand whenever they shopped for groceries or stopped for gas, asking in a small voice, "They won't yell at you again, right?" Jonah would reassure him. Yet he worried these scars would last, that the kids would always harbor a sense of dread about the world outside their home. To help them process, Jonah arranged for therapy sessions at a nearby counseling center. The therapist used play therapy techniques, inviting Henry to use toy figures to reenact the event, or asking Scarlett to write down her fears in a diary. Jonah sat in on some sessions, stunned by how deeply the incident had embedded itself in the children's minds. One day, Scarlett drew a picture of Jonah behind bars, tears streaming down both their faces. She labeled it, fear. That single word made Jonah's chest tighten, reminding him how fragile a child's sense of security can be. Over time, the therapist introduced them to coping strategies, counting breaths, focusing on comforting objects, and role-playing how they might respond if they ever felt unsafe again. Little by little, Jonah saw them regaining their confidence. One night, Scarlett even said, "Dad, I think the world is mostly good people." That comment, innocent yet wise, left Jonah blinking back tears. The more Jonah thought about it, the more he realized stories like his needed to be heard. So he began volunteering to speak at local workshops about transracial adoption, sharing insights from both his foster care background and his role as a father. The gatherings typically took place in library meeting rooms or community centers, drawing small but engaged audiences, prospective adoptive parents, social workers, occasional curious neighbors. He told them about his early life in foster care, about the journey to adopting Scarlett and Henry, and about that dreadful evening at Lou's diner. "It's not about pointing fingers," he'd say, "but about recognizing how quick judgments can destroy trust. Families don't always look the same, but love is love." People would approach him afterward, some teary-eyed, others thanking him for the courage to speak openly. One mother confessed, "I was so scared to adopt a child of a different race because of exactly this scenario. But hearing you speak gives me hope." Jonah always replied, "That hope is what keeps us going. Don't give it up." Scarlett occasionally attended these events, sometimes sitting in the front row with Henry. They'd watch their dad on stage, see how passionately he spoke, and beam at him afterward as if he were the bravest man in the world. Jonah knew the kid still struggled at times, but his willingness to turn pain into advocacy showed them they could rise above fear. When Thanksgiving arrived, Jonah set a goal: to make it the best holiday Scarlett and Henry had ever experienced. He invited Marissa, Raphael, and a handful of other neighbors who had been supportive. The house hummed with excitement. A turkey roasted in the oven, filling the air with the warm aroma of sage and butter. Scarlett helped mash potatoes, giggling whenever Jonah pretended to squeal from the steam. Henry laid out plates and utensils, determined to set the table like a grown-up. As guests trickled in, music played softly, American holiday classics, from jazzy versions of "Over the River and Through the Woods" to modern pop ballads. Conversation flowed. Scarlett proudly recounted how she'd written a short play in school, and Henry showed off a coloring page of a turkey with orange, green, and purple feathers. Eventually, everyone gathered around the dining table, a patchwork of plates piled high with comfort food. Before eating, Marissa proposed a moment of gratitude. She started by expressing thanks for the community that rallied around each other in times of crisis. Raphael, raising his glass, praised Jonah's resilience and love. Then, one by one, people shared something they were thankful for. When it was Scarlett's turn, she glanced at Jonah, cheeks pink, and simply said, "I'm thankful for a dad who never gives up on me." Henry nodded in agreement, beaming. Jonah couldn't form words, so he just patted Scarlett's hand, heart brimming with emotion. Outside, the autumn sky glowed with the last hints of dusk, as if the world itself was softening in that moment. A few days after Thanksgiving, Jonah got a call from a local journalist who'd heard about his story through community chatter. She asked if he'd be willing to do an interview for the city's online news site. Initially, Jonah hesitated. He wasn't sure he wanted more publicity, worried it might invite trolls or negativity. But after some reflection, and conversations with Scarlett and Henry, he decided it could help raise awareness. The interview took place in Jonah's living room. The journalist, a friendly woman named Dana, asked about his background, his motivation to adopt, and, most importantly, the night at Lou's diner. Jonah recounted the events calmly. He admitted the ordeal had left scars on him and his kids. But he also spoke of the remarkable community support that followed, and how it revealed both the darkness of snap judgments and the brightness of neighborly unity. Dana wrapped up the interview with a final question: what do you want people to learn from your experience? Jonah paused, glancing toward the hallway where Scarlett and Henry were peeking out, curious. I hope folks realize that love doesn't always match on the outside, he said. If you see an unusual situation, ask questions, offer help, but don't assume the worst. Fear can hurt innocent people. But kindness can save the day. The interview ran the following week, drawing comments from locals and even from people in other states who stumbled upon the article. Most reactions were supportive, praise for Jonah's courage, outrage at how quickly the police had turned on him. A few negative remarks popped up, but Jonah chose not to engage. Every uplifting comment felt like a reminder that positivity still existed in a world that sometimes jumped straight to suspicion. Scarlett and Henry continued therapy sessions, gradually laughing more, drawing pictures that featured happy outings instead of scary ones. Jonah maintained a routine that gave them structure and comfort: Sunday pancake breakfasts, Wednesday library visits, and occasional board game nights where Scarlett crushed them at Monopoly. Henry still got clingy in public at times, scanning crowds to be sure no one threatened his dad, but Jonah reassured him with gentle words and a firm hand to hold. The local police chief eventually reached out with an offer for a meeting, saying he wanted to address Jonah's concerns directly. Jonah accepted. They sat in the chief's office, and Jonah described every detail of that night. The chief apologized on behalf of the department, explaining that they were reviewing training protocols to prevent such situations. Though it didn't erase the pain, Jonah hoped it might prevent future injustices. Scarlett turned 7 just as springtime arrived. Jonah threw a party in the backyard with a bounce house and a birthday cake shaped like a cartoon unicorn. Henry, now 5, zipped around the yard, chasing bubbles with other neighborhood kids. Jonah manned the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs, a wide grin on his face. He saw how the kids had blossomed since coming to live with him. Even the memory of that terrifying night at the diner couldn't overshadow the joy on Scarlett's face when her friend sang "Happy Birthday." During the party, a parent of one of Scarlett's classmates pulled Jonah aside. "My daughter adores Scarlett," she said. "She keeps telling us about how cool her dad is." Jonah chuckled, feeling honored. The parent lowered her voice. "I heard about what happened to you. I'm sorry our society can be so quick to judge. But I'm glad you're here, showing all of us what family truly means." Jonah thanked her, feeling that familiar prick of emotion in his eyes. Day by day, he sensed an unfolding acceptance, like new petals opening on a flower. The next summer, the neighborhood organized a block-wide yard sale. Families dragged tables onto their driveways, filled them with everything from worn-out sneakers to vintage lamps. Scarlett eagerly set up a lemonade stand at the end of their driveway, drawing a sign that read "Best Lemonade in Town, 50 cents. Henry worked the sidewalk, waving passers-by over. Jonah hovered near them, smiling as neighbors and strangers alike stopped to sample the lemonade. It was a peaceful, bright Saturday. Birds chirped from overhead power lines, and a gentle breeze rustled the pages of an old paperback novel on a sale table. Kids roamed the street, peeking at toy collections or rummaging through boxes of old board games. Jonah chatted with an older couple who'd come to buy a used coffee table from Marissa. They recognized him from the interview about his adoption story, praising his strength. Jonah felt equal parts proud and shy under their compliments, but he accepted them graciously, remembering how far they'd come. Scarlett sold out of lemonade by noon. As she counted the coins, Henry jumped around in excitement. "We did it, Dad," he shouted. Jonah ruffled his hair. "You sure did." He saw the unguarded joy in his children's faces and felt an almost electric sense of gratitude. This was the life he'd fought for: simple, safe, and full of love. Over the course of that year, Jonah balanced parenthood with an increasing role as an advocate. He wrote guest articles on transracial adoption for a non-profit newsletter, highlighting the dire need for more adoptive parents of all backgrounds. He attended city council meetings, gently pushing for better training for law enforcement so they wouldn't jump to conclusions in ambiguous family situations. Scarlett started second grade with confidence, writing an essay titled "Why My Dad Is My Hero," which she proudly showed Jonah. Henry grew tall enough to climb the tree in their yard, often demanding his dad watch him scramble up branches like a superhero. Their bond strengthened daily through small traditions, lighting sparklers on Independence Day, roasting marshmallows in a backyard fire pit, or spontaneously dancing in the living room to upbeat pop songs. In each memory, Jonah saw the reflection of a family that refused to be broken. Despite the forward momentum, Jonah still had flashbacks to that horrible night. Sometimes he'd catch a glimpse of flashing lights on a police car and feel his pulse spike. In those moments, he practiced the breathing techniques he'd learned in therapy: 4 seconds in, hold, 4 seconds out, until the wave of anxiety passed. He reminded himself he was safe, that Scarlett and Henry were safe, and that the world had people like Marissa, Raphael, and Mrs. Caldwell, who came forward to defend him. He spoke honestly with the children about these lingering feelings. At bedtime, when Henry asked, "Dad, are you ever still scared?" Jonah told the truth, "Sometimes, yes. But each day, it gets a little better, because I know we have each other." Henry seemed to find comfort in that shared vulnerability, hugging Jonah's arm as if he never wanted to let go. By the time Scarlett turned 8, Jonah could see how profoundly she'd matured. She was protective of Henry, guiding him around the neighborhood, making sure he looked both ways before crossing the street. She also kept a small notebook of her thoughts and observations, little poems, drawings of Jonah, Henry, and even their neighbor's dog. On the cover, she'd scrawled, "My family, my heart." Jonah once read a snippet, "People can't see love if they only see color. I'm glad we see love first." Henry, meanwhile, adopted a huge stuffed lion named King, a gift from Jonah for his 6th birthday. King followed him everywhere, to the car, to bed, even to the grocery store. When Henry felt worried, he'd clutch the lion like a shield. Jonah recognized that clingy behavior stemmed from a fear of losing yet another source of comfort. Each time, Jonah patiently reassured him, saying, "Nobody's taking you away, Henry. We're family forever." That fall, the community center invited Jonah to host a "Family Stories Night." It was a casual gathering where parents and kids shared meaningful anecdotes or read from favorite children's books. Jonah accepted, thinking it would be good for Scarlett and Henry to see that different families could come together in one supportive space. On the designated evening, they arrived to find a diverse crowd: grandparents, single parents, gay couples with adopted kids, and big traditional families with multiple generations in tow. Jonah picked a short children's book called The Color of Love, which told the story of a puppy finding acceptance in a pack of differently colored dogs. It was sweet, simple, and surprisingly powerful. When it was Jonah's turn, he stood at the front, Scarlett and Henry perched on stools beside him. He read the book in a warm, expressive tone. As he reached the final page, where the puppy was embraced by the pack, he glanced at his kids. Scarlett's eyes glistened. Henry beamed, hugging King the lion close. The audience applauded softly. Afterward, a mom approached Jonah, tears in her eyes, saying how much the story resonated with her biracial family. Though life had largely moved past that dreadful night, the memory occasionally flared up, like pressing on a bruise. The final echo came one sunny afternoon when Scarlett found a photo on Jonah's phone, a snapshot someone had taken during the diner incident, showing Jonah pinned against a police cruiser, Henry crying, and Scarlett frozen in shock. The painful image surfaced in a news segment about transracial adoption challenges. She brought the phone to Jonah, tears welling up. "I hate this picture," she said, voice shaky. "Can we delete it?" Jonah crouched down, heart aching for her. "Scarlett, this photo hurts, but it's also proof of what we overcame. It reminds me how you were brave enough to run out and defend me, and how the community rallied. We can delete it if you want. Or we can keep it to remember how strong we are." Scarlett blinked, tears rolling down her cheeks. She sniffled, hugging Jonah. "Let's keep it, for now," she whispered. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pressing his chin to her head. "We can always change our minds later," he said gently.